Good afternoon. My name is Richard Lapchick, and I was asked to tell you a little bit about my life. In 1950, I was a 5-year-old boy and looked outside my bedroom window in Yonkers, New York, where I was raised, and saw my father's image swinging from a tree with people under the tree picketing. For several years after that, I'd pick up the extension phone in our house, my dad not knowing I was listening, and the call was the same all the time. Nigger lover, nigger lover, nigger lover is what they said to my dad. I didn't know what it was all about, except that there were a lot of people in this world who didn't like my father. It turned out that he was the coach of the New York Knicks and the National Basketball Association, and in 1950 had signed the first African-American player in the history of the league. It is now 80% African-American, but in 1950 there were a lot of people unhappy about it. In 1952, my dad took me to a fundraiser at Madison Square Garden in New York City, the big basketball arena. And my father and Jackie Robinson were the two keynote speakers. My dad knew I was a Dodger fan, so I would love to meet Jackie Robinson. I had no idea of his social significance. I spent a couple of minutes with him. It was a wonderful experience. And afterwards, my dad took the New York media to a restaurant called Mama Leone's, which was near the old Madison Square Garden. Jackie Robinson went home to his wife, Rachel. And one of the sports writers, a famous columnist who endured as a famous columnist for the next 25 years, said to his colleagues, "Did you see that nigger showboating?" And my dad grabbed my arm and pulled me aside and said simply, "Some people only know how to hate." In 1960, I was a 14-year-old boy. Because my dad was who he was a double inductee into the Basketball Hall of Fame. Everybody told me I was going to play in the National Basketball Association. So when my dad asked me to accompany my mom to go to Europe to visit my sister, I resisted at first, but he also was able to get me access to the Rome Olympic Games. And on the way to Rome, we stopped in Dachau, the Nazi concentration camp, and I was simply never the same person after that, seeing what people were capable of doing to other people in the name of race, ideology, religion, and nationalism changed this 14-year-old boy's life. But then I got to Rome and saw on those playing fields and in those arenas these athletes who ignored all those differences that the Nazis used to divide us and came together for this ultimate athletic event where they had trained their entire lives to be able to perform at the highest possible level. In 1978, I was the American leader of the sports boycott of South Africa. South Africa there was an oil boycott, a bank loan boycott, a trade boycott, and a sports boycott. You could smuggle in oil, you could smuggle in trade, you could smuggle in currency, but you couldn't play sports in the dark. So a lot of people felt that the sports boycott became one of South Africa's Achilles' heels. Their first team was coming to the United States. It was a Davis Cup team that was playing in the North American zone of the Davis Cup because they were no longer allowed to play in the European zone where they had originally competed. We went down to Nashville to try to stop the matches from being held. I'd been asked by the African governments to announce that they would boycott the Los Angeles Olympic Games if this team was allowed to compete in the U.S. So when I made that announcement at a press conference at Vanderbilt University, all three networks were there. And Dick Schaap, who was the correspondent for NBC Nightly News at the time, came up to me after the press conference and before I addressed the student body and told me that the financial backers of the Davis Cup had pulled out. Looked like the matches were going to be canceled. I announced that to the crowd. It was an anti-apartheid crowd. They went crazy. When I flew home to Virginia that night where I was teaching, I felt maybe for the first time in my life I had done something worthwhile. The next night, I was working late in my college office. The office was in the school's library, which closed at 10:30. And at 10:45, there was a knock on the door. I assumed it was the campus security police checking because they saw a light on. Instead, when I opened the door, there were two men wearing stocking masks who proceeded to cause liver damage, kidney damage, a hernia, concussion, and carved nigger in my stomach with a pair of my office scissors. So you can see that my journey on the issue of race and sport has been both personal and profound. It's something that, for me, literally changed my life. Love and forgiveness, those are such powerful words. I'm proud to be representing the Sport and Spiritual Embodiment Panel and Council. I'd like the council members to please stand and be acknowledged. And we would like to thank Michelle and Sandy, who gave us so much help along the way throughout the year, and especially since we've been here at the CC. I define a leader as somebody who stands up for justice and doesn't block its path. There are so many social justice issues out there that we can use the sports platform to address, things that our children are facing every day. In my own country, we talked about a post-civil rights era when President Obama took the oath of office. While he ran for the presidency, there were 600 hate groups. As he was elected, there were 800 hate groups. Today, there are 1,000 hate groups in the United States, the largest number of hate groups in the history of our country. Our children have simply learned how to hate. Anti-Semitism is on the rise. Our children are waging war on one another. 400,000 high school students were hospitalized 3 years ago because of a violent act that took place on their high school campus. 12 children every day die of a handgun wound in the United States. Children under the age of 16 die of a handgun wound. The high school dropout rate is 40% in urban America. The poverty gap has grown. The issue of men's violence against women and boys' violence against girls, 4.5 million American women are battered every year, 900,000 are raped every year. 34% of teenage girls in the United States will have a child before they reach the age of 20. And when researchers ask them, why did you take this chance that your education will be disrupted, that you might not have the career that you thought about? The almost universal response from those girls was, I wanted somebody to love me. They didn't feel loved at that time. We're the biggest consumers of drugs in the world in the United States, and the biggest consumers of drugs in the United States are people under the age of 25. Presumably, you take a drug because you're not happy with the way you feel without it, or you think you feel better. Performance-enhancing drugs, which we read so much about during the Olympic Games, are not the property, are mainly used by Olympians or Major League Baseball players or NFL football players. They're used more by teenage boys under the age of 16 who aren't athletes at all, who feel so frail in their self-image. They take this drug to change, or substance to change how they feel about themselves, faster, stronger, whatever their aim is. We learned a lot more about child abuse this year in the United States as a result of the scandal that took place at Penn State University. But it's my hope, and the hope of other people who are involved with issues like this, that we look beyond the 11 victims of the terrible things that happened at Penn State and understand that there's a report of child abuse in the United States made every 10 seconds, and only 1 out of 10 is actually reported. There are more human slaves at this time than at any other time in human history on a global level. It's estimated that between 28 and 30 million people live in slavery. More than half of them are women. More than half of the women are girls brought into the sex trade. The average age of a girl brought into the sex trade is 12. If she's in it for 4 years, then it's unlikely that she would be freed after that time, but she'll have had sex 10 times a day, 365 days a year. If she's liberated at age 16, I said very unlikely, she will have been raped 14,000 times. Most of us know somebody who tragically has been a victim of sexual assault, and we know that it's almost impossible to get over any such attack. What is a child of 16 going to do after being raped 14,000 times? During the approximately 30 minutes that I will be here with you, in my country, 70 children dropped out of high school, 23 high school students were victimized by violence, 1 child was killed by a handgun, 23 babies were born to teenage mothers, 1,800 children were abused, 258 women or girls were battered, 52 were raped, and globally, 57 were enslaved during this 30-minute period that our FAC has with you today. Love and forgiveness, it's why we're all here. We can help these young people to believe in what they can't see, to build a floor on the despair that is so much a part of their lives, and build a roof over their imagination so that they can believe that their dreams can be anything they want to be, that roof to protect them. But we've got a big job. My journey has been primarily on the issue of race and gender in sport, but you can have a similar journey in whatever field, and of all the facts we've heard from already and those that come after this, our children are depending on us. We have a huge role to play. I firmly believe that people who live in despair can be transformed by people who care, and I think throughout these 2 days, we've seen an enormous number of people and organizations represented who care deeply. I came here today because I know you're here and wanted to be able to share some things with you. For me, there's something about sport. The thing about sport that I think differentiates us from everybody else is that we have the huddle. And in that huddle, it's what I call the miracle of sport. It suddenly doesn't matter if you're African American or white or Latino or Asian American or Native American or Arab American. It doesn't matter if you're Protestant, Catholic, Jew, Buddhist, Sikh, Hindu, or Muslim. It doesn't matter if you're young or old. It doesn't matter if you're gay or straight, or if you come from a rich family or a poor family. You can't win if we don't pull together as a team. Imagine if we can take that concept and bring it into all our other workplaces, all our educational institutions. Sport can help us heal after tragedy. I mentioned at the beginning that I was a Brooklyn Dodger fan. There was one thing that you also were if you were a Brooklyn Dodger fan. I'm sorry for those of you who don't know baseball in America, but you hate the New York Yankees. So some of you know, that's good. And I was certainly one of those people until 9/11. And you may remember that after 9/11, the Yankees made the World Series, and suddenly everybody was rooting for the New York Yankees, including me, because it represented the possibility that life would go on as we one time knew it. Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans was the most devastating physical trauma that our country has experienced in the last century. The people in New Orleans will tell you that the most important thing that happened to them since 2005 was when the New Orleans Saints won the Super Bowl in 2010. Sports, and my wife and I watched the Women's World Cup last year, and we were rooting for the American women with all our hearts and souls until they lost to Japan, and we looked at each other, and we knew that it was way more important for Japan to win this than it was for the United States because of all the things that they had endured in that previous year. Sport can help us be inspired. You're going to meet, you saw the red bandana on your chairs. You're going to learn about Wells Crothers in the next couple of days, and it's going to be inspiring to you. I was lucky enough to be asked to co-author the autobiography of Eddie Robinson, who was a great football coach at Grambling State University, an historically black college in the United States. Coached there for 57 years. When he passed away in 2007, I was asked to help deliver part of the eulogy. There were 9 of us who did. The person who preceded me was Willie Davis, one of his great players who became an all-pro player in the NFL, is one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the country today. And Willie Davis, we were in an arena with 9,500 people in it. Willie Davis asked that coaches' former players all stand up. It's a sight I can see while I'm looking out at this audience. 2,400 men stood up. Players from the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s came to this part in deep rural Louisiana to thank Coach Robinson one more time for what he meant to them. It's made me think ever since then, what do I want my legacy to be? And to ask people I have the privilege to speak to ask you, what do you think your legacy is going to be? Why are people going to come to say thank you to us? What will we have done to make their lives better? Sports can help change society. Think Jackie Robinson, think Billie Jean King. When anti-Muslim feelings have swept America in the past 10 or 11 years, I like to think of Muhammad Ali and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, perhaps 2 of the best-known Muslim Americans, and how they stand for peace as tall as anybody else. There is something about sport, but we can apply the principles that I've been talking about here today in any part of our society, and all the organizations you are working for are absolutely doing that. But we can do more. We can change lives. You can make them believe in what they cannot see. I was lucky enough, because of my work in the anti-apartheid movement, to be invited to the inauguration of Nelson Mandela. I don't think there's any person alive today who better represents the concepts of love and forgiveness than President Mandela. After he was inaugurated in Pretoria, there were diplomatic parties being held all across Pretoria in his honor. President Mandela, instead of going to them, got in a helicopter and went back to Johannesburg, where he attended a Zambia-South Africa soccer match. And I was blessed enough that he asked me to sit with him in his box. And I said, Mr. President, why did you come here when all those parties were being held for you in Pretoria? And I was quite sure I knew what the answer was, but I wanted to be able to hear it from him and to be able to share it with you. He said, I came here because I wanted our athletes to know how much I appreciated the sacrifices they made during the sports boycott. I became president today far sooner than I would have had they not made those sacrifices. For me, it's the ultimate power of sports story. Again, what is our legacy going to be? What are we going to do? If our children have learned how to hate, we can teach them how to love again. If they're waging war on one another, we can give them the tools to make peace and forgive each other. We have that power, no matter what our field of life is. Thank you so much for listening. God bless you all. Thank you.